Every year, millions of people pass through courtrooms across the country. Most of them are nervous, quiet, maybe even remorseful. But then there are the women on this list. The ones who made the FBI's most wanted, who orchestrated elaborate schemes, who took lives without hesitation, and who stood before a judge with the weight of the world crashing down on them. Some ran for decades, some barely made it a few days. But all of them ended up in the same place. Here are the most wanted women in court. Ruja Ignatova.
But not only do you need discipline, your close friends and family need to watch their digital footprints too.
OneCoin launched in 2014, and by June 2016, its founder was performing like a rock star. A woman walked onto the stage at Wembley Arena in London wearing a flowing ball gown while Alicia Keys blasted through the speakers. Thousands of investors were cheering for her. She called herself the Crypto Queen, and she told the crowd that in 2 years, nobody would be talking about Bitcoin anymore. Her name was Ruja Ignatova, and her company, OneCoin, was supposed to be the future of cryptocurrency. But there was a problem. OneCoin was never a real cryptocurrency. It never existed on a blockchain. The whole thing was a multi-level marketing scheme built on nothing. Investors would buy packages, recruit new members, and watch their supposed coin value climb. But Ignatova and her co-founder, Carl Sebastian Greenwood, were manipulating the numbers behind the scenes. Internally, they actually referred to OneCoin as a trashy coin in their own emails. Between 2014 and 2016, investors poured more than $4 billion into OneCoin. About $50 million of that came from American investors alone, and the money went everywhere: real estate in Serbia, racehorses in Abu Dhabi, even an oil field in Madagascar. Then on the 25th of October 2017, Ignatova boarded a flight from Sofia, Bulgaria, to Athens, Greece, and vanished. Investigators believe she was tipped off about a federal investigation. She has not been seen since. In June 2022, she was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, only the 11th woman to ever appear there. Greenwood pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy to launder money. Her brother Konstantin was arrested at LAX in 2019 and also pleaded guilty. But Ruja Ignatova is still out there, wherever she is. The FBI reward for information leading to her arrest now stands at $5 million. Donna Jean Wilmot. In 1985, Donna Jean Wilmot and her partner Claude Daniel Marks, both affiliated with the far-left radical group The Weather Underground, attempted to buy 37 pounds of explosives to blow open the federal prison at Leavenworth, Kansas. Their goal was to free Puerto Rican nationalist leader Oscar Lopez Rivera, who had been convicted of seditious conspiracy. There was just one catch. The person selling them those explosives was actually an undercover FBI agent. So the plan fell apart before it ever got off the ground. But instead of turning themselves in, Wilmot and Marks discovered an FBI surveillance device underneath their car and went on the run. For almost a decade, they lived under assumed identities in Pittsburgh, blending into the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Wilmot worked tirelessly with local AIDS charities. Marks lived just a few blocks away. They had started families, built new lives, and nobody had a clue who they really were. In 1987, both were added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, the first man and woman team to land on it together. But they remained underground for 7 more years after that. It was only in December 1994 that the two surrendered to federal authorities in Chicago after nearly a year of negotiations. Wilmot pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Marks received 6 years because of his larger role in the plot. Angela Davis. In the summer of 1970, Angela Davis was one of the most recognizable activists in the country. A professor, a member of the Communist Party, a vocal advocate for civil rights and prison reform, she was also deeply involved in the case of the Soledad brothers, 3 black inmates accused of killing a prison guard at Soledad Prison in California. On the 7th of August, 1970, 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson walked into a Marin County courtroom carrying a satchel full of weapons. He armed inmates who were present in the courtroom, and together they took hostages, including Judge Harold Haley, Deputy District Attorney Gary Thomas, and 3 jurors. Jackson taped a shotgun to the judge's neck and attempted to leave the courthouse. When police opened fire in the parking lot, the situation turned into chaos. Jonathan Jackson, 2 inmates, and Judge Haley were all killed in the shootout. And when investigators traced the firearms used that day, they discovered every single one of them was registered to Angela Davis. On the 18th of August, 1970, Davis became the 3rd woman ever placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. She fled to Chicago, then Miami, then New York, changing her appearance along the way. She was captured about 2 months later, on the 13th of October, 1970. Davis spent 16 months in custody before being released on bail in February 1972. Her trial became an international cause. Aretha Franklin, John Lennon, and the Rolling Stones all voiced support. The prosecution argued she had supplied the weapons knowing they would be used, but the defense maintained she had purchased the guns for her own protection and had no knowledge of Jackson's plan. On the 4th of June 1972, a jury acquitted Angela Davis of all charges. Shawntae Henderson.
A verdict is expected tonight in the murder trial of a Kansas City woman who was once on the
On the 2nd of September 2006, Shawntae Henderson shot and killed 20-year-old DeAndre Parker at a gas station in Kansas City, Missouri. Henderson claimed Parker had tried to run her over with his truck, but Kansas City police saw it very differently. They described Henderson as a reputed leader of the 12th Street Gang, someone they suspected of involvement in as many as 5 other homicides and around 50 shootings. Henderson was 23 at the time, and she grew up in the Charlie Parker Square housing project. According to authorities, she had modeled herself after a senior gang member named Steve Wright and was known for carrying high-powered weaponry, including assault rifles with 100-round magazines. After the shooting, Henderson went underground and even seemed to enjoy the attention. On her MySpace page, she referred to herself as the girl on the news and posted audio of herself rapping about life in what she called Killer City. On the 31st of March 2007, Henderson was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, the 8th woman in the list's history. And she was captured that very same day, arrested without incident at the home of an associate in Kansas City. She spent less than 24 hours on the list. At trial, Henderson had a bench trial, and the judge acquitted her of the murder charge. But she was found guilty of the lesser charges of voluntary manslaughter and armed criminal action, and she received parole with a 10-year suspended sentence. 5 months later, while still on parole, Henderson was pulled over and caught with narcotics and an illegal firearm. That violation triggered a federal case and her original suspended sentence. All told, Henderson was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Brenda Delgado.
Passion in Dallas. Brenda Delgado, the mastermind in the murder for hire plot.
Dr. Kendra Hatcher was 35 years old, a pediatric dentist who had spent time in Ecuador during dental school, providing free care to the poor. By 2015, she was thriving in Dallas, working a job she loved, and dating a dermatologist named Ricardo Paniagua. They were already talking about marriage and were about to leave for a vacation together. Brenda Delgado was Paniagua's ex-girlfriend, and she could not let go. She tracked his cell phone, monitored his emails, and when she realized he had moved on, she decided Hatcher had to go. Delgado recruited Christopher Love with promises of drugs and money, and she brought in Crystal Cortez as the getaway driver, paying her $500. On the evening of the 2nd of September 2015, Cortez drove Love to the parking garage of Hatcher's uptown Dallas apartment complex. Love got out and waited. When Hatcher returned from work, he shot her in the head. A witness identified the Jeep Cherokee used in the crime as one Delgado had borrowed. Cortez was tracked down and confessed, implicating both Love and Delgado. Delgado fled to Mexico, and the FBI placed her on the 10 most wanted list. She was captured in Torreon, Mexico, in April 2016 and extradited back to Dallas. But because of the extradition agreement with Mexico, the death penalty was taken off the table. Christopher Love was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Cortez pleaded guilty to a reduced murder charge and received 35 years. And in June 2019, a jury took just 18 minutes to convict Delgado of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Well, it's been a year and a half since a pregnant woman was gunned
Minor.
down. Well, it's been a year and a half since a pregnant woman was gunned down.
Tameka Perry, a 23-year-old mother of 2, lived on the first floor of a duplex in Milwaukee. Shanika Minor's mother lived upstairs. And Minor's mother had complained that Perry was playing music at unreasonable hours. On the 5th of March, 2016, Minor showed up at the residence to confront Perry about it. Miner's mother stepped in and managed to calm the situation down. But during that confrontation, Miner brandished a firearm and fired a round into the air. She came back the next day. Just before 3 a.m. on March 6, Miner returned to Perry's home. Her mother again tried to stop it, physically placing herself between her daughter and Perry in the hallway. Perry was 9 months pregnant at the time, just 5 days from her due date. Miner reached over her mother's shoulder and fired a single shot, striking Perry in the chest. Both Perry and her unborn baby died. Perry's 2 other children were home and witnessed the whole thing. Miner fled the state and disappeared for nearly 4 months. On the 28th of June 2016, the FBI added her to the 10 most wanted list, the 10th woman in the list's history. 3 days later, on July 1, she was arrested without incident at a motel in Fayetteville, North Carolina, after an anonymous tip to the FBI. Miner pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree reckless homicide and was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 10 years of extended supervision. At sentencing, the judge gave her more time than the prosecution had even requested. Catherine Ann Power.
Boston police officer Walter Schroeder was gunned down during an armed bank robbery back in 1970. The militant gang responsible included a woman.
In 1970, Catherine Ann Power was a senior at Brandeis University, a straight-A student who had become the leader of the campus anti-war movement. She was also radicalized enough to believe that peaceful protest was no longer sufficient, so she helped organize something far more extreme. On the 20th of September 1970, Power and her group, which included fellow student Susan Sachs and 3 others, raided a National Guard armory in Newburyport, Massachusetts. They stole a pickup truck, blasting caps, and 400 rounds of ammunition. 3 days later, they robbed the State Street Bank in Brighton, carrying handguns, a shotgun, and a submachine gun. They escaped with $26,000 in cash that they intended to use to fund a revolution. But Boston police officer Walter Schroeder responded to the call. He was a 42-year-old patrolman, highly decorated, the father of 9 children. One of the group's members, William Gilday, shot Schroeder in the back. He died from his wounds. Within a few years, everyone was caught except Catherine Ann Power. Susan Sachs was captured in 1975 and served several years in prison, but Power vanished completely. For 23 years, she lived under the alias Alice Metzinger, first settling in Oregon. She opened a restaurant, got married, had a son, and co-signed loans, all while her most wanted photograph hung in post offices across the country. By the early 1990s, Power was battling severe clinical depression under the weight of what she had done. In September 1993, she voluntarily surrendered to authorities in Boston. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter and armed robbery. Power was sentenced to 8 to 12 years in prison and served 6 years before her release. Bernadine Dawn.
It was hard to picture Bernadine Dawn as a most wanted fugitive as she left the criminal courts.
By 1970, Bernadine Dawn was one of the most prominent figures in the radical left. A University of Chicago Law School graduate, she had become a national leader of the Weather Underground, the militant offshoot of Students for a Democratic Society that believed violence was a legitimate tool for fighting the government. On the 6th of March 1970, 3 Weather Underground members were killed when a bomb they were building detonated inside a townhouse in Greenwich Village, New York. The bomb had been intended for a military installation. Diana Orton, Ted Gold, and Terry Robbins all died in the blast. After the townhouse explosion, Dawn and the remaining leadership went underground. She was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in 1970, charged with federal anti-riot conspiracy and jumping bail. For the next 3 years, the FBI hunted her while the Weather Underground continued its campaign of bombings against government targets. But in 1973, a federal judge dismissed the case against Dawn and her fellow weathermen. The judge ruled that the FBI had obtained its evidence through illegal surveillance tactics, including unauthorized wiretaps, so the charges that put her on the most wanted list in the first place were thrown out. Dawn remained underground until 1980, when she and her husband, fellow Weather Underground leader Bill Ayers, turned themselves in. She pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges of aggravated battery and bail jumping, paid a $1,500 fine, and was placed on 3 years of probation. She later spent 7 months in jail for refusing to cooperate with a grand jury investigating the 1,981 Brinks armored car robbery. Dawn eventually became a clinical associate professor at Northwestern University's School of Law, where she founded the Children and Family Justice Center. Antoinette Frank.
Staying with Attorney General Liz Murrow in her office, set to be in an Orleans Parish.
In March 1995, Antoinette Frank was a 23-year-old officer with the New Orleans Police Department. She also worked paid-off-duty security details at the Kim An restaurant, a Vietnamese family-run noodle house in New Orleans East. She knew the family, she knew the layout, and she knew another officer, 25-year-old Ronald Williams II, who also worked security there. On the night of March 3, just before 2 a.m. on March 4, Frank returned to the restaurant with her accomplice, 18-year-old Rogers Lacaze. But she was not there to protect anyone. She was there to rob the place. During the robbery, Frank shot and killed Officer Williams, and then walked into the kitchen where 17-year-old Quang Vu and his 24-year-old sister Ha were kneeling on the floor. She shot them both, but there was a third sibling. Xiao Vu had hidden inside the restaurant's walk-in freezer during the shooting. She survived by staying perfectly still and silent. After the murders, Frank left the scene. But when the surviving family members called 911, Frank returned in her patrol car, pretending to be one of the responding officers investigating the crime. She walked up to Xiao Vu and asked what had happened. Xiao looked her in the face and said she knew exactly what happened because Frank had killed her brother and sister. Frank was arrested that same night. At trial, the jury deliberated for just 22 minutes before finding her guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. They recommended death. On the 20th of October, 1995, Judge Frank Marullo sentenced her to death by lethal injection. As of 2025, Antoinette Frank remains the only woman on Louisiana's death row and the only female police officer in U.S. history sentenced to death for killing a fellow officer. Emilia Carr.
Knows I am not the same person. I'm sitting here on 2 life sentences for first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. This is crazy.
In February 2009, Emilia Carr and her on-again, off-again boyfriend Joshua Fulgham came up with a plan to get rid of the one person standing between them and the life they wanted together. That person was Heather Strong, Fulgham's 26-year-old estranged wife and the mother of his 2 children. Carr and Fulgham lured Strong to an abandoned storage trailer in Boardman, Florida, in Marion County. When Strong arrived and tried to leave, Fulgham held her down while Carr taped her to a chair. They then forced Strong to sign a document giving Fulgham full custody of their children. After that, Carr placed a garbage bag over Strong's head. Fulgham held it tight and wrapped tape around her neck. Carr also attempted to break Strong's neck. Fulgham then placed his hands over Strong's nose and mouth and suffocated her. Carr was 8 months pregnant at the time. Strong's body was found near the trailer 4 days later. In December 2010, a jury found Carr guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder. The jury voted 7-5 to recommend the death penalty, and in February 2011, she was formally sentenced to death. She became the first woman sentenced to death in Marion County since Eileen Wuornos in 1992. Fulgham pleaded guilty and received 2 consecutive life sentences. But Carr's death sentence did not hold. In January 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Florida's death penalty scheme was unconstitutional because it did not require a unanimous jury. Because Carr's jury had voted 7-5, her sentence was vacated. In May 2017, she was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Taylor Parker.
Testimony really showed just how far Taylor Parker was allegedly willing to go to fake her pregnancy and come up with the baby in time for her supposed due date. Parker is facing the death penalty in this trial. She is accused of capital murder and kidnapping and the death of 21-year-old Reagan Hancock and her unborn baby Brexlyn.
For months leading up to October 2020, Taylor Parker had been telling everyone she was pregnant. She wore prosthetic bellies, posted doctored ultrasound images on social media, and even held a gender reveal party. Her boyfriend believed every bit of it, but Taylor Parker was never pregnant. On the 9th of October 2020, Parker drove to the home of 21-year-old Reagan Simmons Hancock in New Boston, Texas. The 2 women knew each other. Parker had actually taken Reagan's engagement and wedding photos, but Parker was not there for a visit. She beat Reagan, stabbed her, strangled her, and then used a scalpel to cut her unborn baby from her body. Reagan's 3-year-old daughter was inside the house at the time. Parker fled the scene with the infant and began speeding toward a hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. A state trooper pulled her over for erratic driving and found her covered in dried blood, still holding the baby. The umbilical cord was still attached. Parker claimed she had given birth on the side of the road, but hospital staff quickly determined she had not given birth at all. The baby did not survive. In October 2022, a Bowie County jury deliberated for roughly 1 hour before finding Parker guilty of capital murder. The sentencing phase ran for 25 days, with testimony from 142 witnesses. On the 9th of November 2022, the same jury sentenced her to death. In November 2025, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals unanimously upheld her death sentence, denying all 25 points raised by the defense. Parker is currently housed on death row at the Patrick L. O'Daniel Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Monica Cementilli.
We are on the record, Mr. Cementilli. The defendant is present, all counsel present, jury and also present. Good morning. Juror number 10, I understand the jury has reached verdicts. Is that correct? Are the verdicts dated and signed?
Fabio Cementilli was a celebrity hairstylist whose client list included some of the biggest names in entertainment. He was also vice president at Coty Inc., one of the largest beauty companies in the world. He lived in Woodland Hills, California, with his wife Monica and their 2 daughters. They were about to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary. But Monica had been having an affair. Her lover was Robert Baker, a convicted sex offender and former adult film actor she had met at a gym, and the 2 of them had a plan. Fabio had a $1.6 million life insurance policy, and Monica wanted to collect it. On the night of the 23rd of January 2017, Monica left the front door unlocked. Baker entered the home, walked out to the backyard patio where Fabio was sitting, and stabbed him to death. Baker then fled the scene in Fabio's own Porsche, which was later found abandoned. There was also a third co-conspirator. Christopher Austin, a friend of Baker's, helped in the planning and even attempted to kill Fabio the day before but lost his nerve. Austin eventually provided investigators with the key information they needed. Baker pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life without parole. Austin pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received 16 years to life. And on the 11th of April 2025, a jury found Monica Cementilli guilty of murder and conspiracy with special circumstances of financial gain and lying in wait. At her trial, Baker took the stand and tried to take sole responsibility. He told the jury Monica had nothing to do with it. The jury rejected his account entirely. On the 23rd of June 2025, Monica Cementilli was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called her the mastermind of the conspiracy. Devin Michaels.
I don't know how to face this.
It's just, this wouldn't be appropriate.
I completely understand.
Let's go to trial.
A woman about to be sentenced for killing and decapitating the father of her children withdraws her guilty plea, saying she's innocent.
Devin Michaels was a former adult film actress who had 2 daughters with a man named Jonathan Willett. The 2 married in 2012 and divorced in 2018. After the divorce, Michaels married Willett's adult son, Devier, from a previous relationship, so her former husband became, technically, her father-in-law. There was a custody battle over the 2 daughters, and Willett had been granted sole custody. On the night of the 6th of August 2023, Michaels went to Willett's mother's home in Henderson, Nevada. She beat Willett with a stick, killing him, and then decapitated his body. When Willett's mother discovered him, he was wrapped in bloody blankets, doused in chemicals, and his head was missing. Police believe Michaels discarded the head in the trash somewhere in her northwest Las Vegas neighborhood. It has never been recovered. Michaels was arrested on the 15th of August, 2023. She initially agreed to a plea deal for second-degree murder, which would have made her eligible for parole after 15 years. But at her sentencing hearing, she withdrew the plea and chose to fight the charge at trial. That turned out to be a costly decision. In November 2025, after a 2-week trial, a jury convicted Michaels of first-degree murder with a deadly weapon following roughly 2 hours of deliberation. On the 8th of January 2026, Judge Tierra Jones sentenced Michaels to 20 years to life for the murder, plus an additional 8 to 20 years for the deadly weapon enhancement, to be served consecutively. That means Michaels will not be eligible for parole until she has served at least 28 years. Judith Moran.
Gangland widow Judy Moran is tonight contemplating spending the rest of her life in prison after a jury found her guilty of orchestrating the murder of her brother-in-law. Des Moran was gunned down in a cafe 2 years ago, and the weapons used were found in Judy Moran's home. Jury members delivered their verdict after nearly a week of deliberations.
In Melbourne, Australia, the name Moran carries a very specific weight. The Moran family was at the centre of the Melbourne Gangland Wars, a bloody conflict between rival crime families that raged from 1998 to 2006 and left dozens of people dead. Judith Moran was the matriarch. Her husband Lewis was shot dead in a pub in 2004. Her son Jason was gunned down at a children's football clinic in 2003. Her other son Mark was killed outside his home in 2000. By 2009, Judith Moran was the last one standing, and she wanted her brother-in-law, Desmond Moran, dead. On the 15th of June 2009, Desmond Moran was sitting outside a pasta cafe on Union Road in Ascot Vale when a gunman walked up and shot him in broad daylight. The shooter was Jeffrey Armour, a man recruited and directed by Judith Moran herself. Police moved quickly. The very next day, Moran was arrested, along with 3 others. When officers searched her home, they found a hidden safe containing 3 handguns, 2 stolen license plates, a wig, and clothing that matched witness descriptions of what the getaway team had been wearing. Surveillance footage also captured Moran concealing the getaway car in her garage. On the 9th of March 2011, Judith Moran was convicted of murder. When the guilty verdict was read, she collapsed in the dock. She was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with a minimum of 21 years before parole eligibility. Jodi Arias.
The court has considered the nature and circumstances of the offense. I have considered the aggravating factor found by the jury. I have identified aggravating and mitigating factors and considered those factors.
On the 9th of June 2008, friends of 30-year-old Travis Alexander found his body in the shower of his Mesa, Arizona home. He had been stabbed 27 times, his throat had been slashed from ear to ear, and he had been shot in the forehead. He had been dead for approximately 5 days. Jodi Arias and Alexander had dated for about a year and a half before breaking up in 2007, but the relationship continued in a complicated, on and off manner, and by June 2008, things had deteriorated significantly. Alexander had told friends he considered Arias a stalker. She had slashed his tires, hacked into his social media, and followed him on dates. When police questioned Arias, she told them she had not been anywhere near Mesa that day. Then she changed her story and said 2 masked intruders had broken in and attacked both of them. Then she changed it again, this time claiming she killed Alexander in self-defense after he became violent. But the evidence told its own story. Photos recovered from Alexander's own camera showed Arias at his home on the day of the killing, including intimate images taken shortly before the attack and accidental photos taken during it. Arias's trial became one of the most followed cases of its era. She testified for 18 days on the stand. On the 8th of May, 2013, a jury convicted her of first-degree murder. But the penalty phase was a different matter. 2 separate juries deadlocked on whether to impose the death penalty. The first jury could not reach a unanimous decision, and neither could the second. On the 13th of April, 2015, Jodi Arias was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judith Clark.
Just into our newsroom, Judith Clark, the getaway driver involved in the notorious and deadly Brinks truck heist in 1981.
On the 20th of October, 1981, members of the far-left May 19th Communist Organization joined forces with members of the Black Liberation Army to rob a Brinks armored truck at a shopping mall in Nanuet, New York. During the robbery, security guard Peter Page was shot and killed. The group escaped with $1.6 million in cash and drove to a roadblock set up by local police in nearby Nyack. When they arrived at the roadblock, Judith Clark was behind the wheel of the getaway vehicle. As officers approached, gunmen inside the van opened fire, killing Sergeant Edward O'Grady and Officer Waverly Brown. O'Grady was a father of 3. Brown was the first black officer on the Nyack police force. Clark was captured at the scene after crashing the vehicle while trying to flee. At trial, Clark refused to participate in her own defense. She would not recognize the authority of the court and declared herself a political prisoner of war. She was convicted, and in 1983, sentenced to 75 years to life in prison. Behind bars, though, something changed. Over the course of 37 years, Clark earned a college degree, trained service dogs, founded an AIDS education program, and counseled mothers in prison. She expressed deep remorse for what had happened that day. In 2016, Governor Andrew Cuomo commuted her sentence, making her eligible for parole. In April 2019, the parole board granted her release. On the 10th of May 2019, Judith Clark walked out of prison at the age of 69 after 37 years behind bars. Kimberly Kessler.
The ability to stand trial for murder.
Before she arrived in Florida, nobody really knew who Kimberly Kessler was, and that was by design. Since 1996, she had lived under at least 18 different aliases across 33 cities in 14 different states. She stole identities, fabricated backgrounds, and moved on whenever anyone got too close to figuring her out. By 2018, she was working at Tangle's Hair Salon in Fernandina Beach, Florida, alongside a woman named Jolene Cummings, a 34-year-old mother of 3. On Mother's Day, the 13th of May 2018, Cummings was supposed to pick up her children after work. She never came. Surveillance footage showed Kessler was the last person to see Cummings alive. Cameras captured Kessler abandoning Cummings' car at a nearby Home Depot parking lot. Another camera caught her throwing a garbage bag into a dumpster near the salon. A search of Kessler's internet history revealed she had looked up the phrase, "no body, no crime." Cummings' body has never been found. Kessler's behavior in custody was erratic from the start. She went on a hunger strike, attacked 2 law enforcement officers by throwing feces at them, and was removed from the courtroom on almost a daily basis during trial for disrupting the proceedings. On the 9th of December 2021, a jury found Kessler guilty of first-degree murder after deliberating for less than 3 hours. On the 27th of January 2022, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Leslie Van Houten.
She's a convicted killer and former follower of Charles Manson and is now free after spending more than 50 years in prison.
In August 1969, Leslie Van Houten was 19 years old, a former homecoming princess from Monrovia, California, and one of Charles Manson's most devoted followers. On the night of the 10th of August 1969, one day after the murders of Sharon Tate and 4 others, Van Houten participated in the killings of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca at their Los Angeles home. Manson and several followers entered the home, tied up the couple, and then left the actual killing to his followers. Van Houten later described holding Rosemary LaBianca down with a pillowcase over her head while fellow follower Charles Watson stabbed her. Then, on Manson's order, Van Houten picked up a knife and stabbed Rosemary at least 16 times in the lower back. The group smeared the victim's blood on the walls before leaving. In 1971, Van Houten was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, and her sentence was automatically commuted to life with the possibility of parole. What followed was one of the longest parole battles in California history. From 2016 onward, the state parole board recommended Van Houten's release 5 separate times. And each time, it was blocked by a governor. Jerry Brown rejected it twice. Gavin Newsom rejected it 3 times. But in May 2023, a California appeals court overruled Newsom's final rejection, and Newsom announced he would not challenge the ruling. On the 11th of July 2023, Leslie Van Houten walked out of the California Institution for Women at the age of 73, after 53 years behind bars. She was driven to a transitional housing facility to begin learning how to live in a world she had not seen in over half a century. Rebecca Frick.
24-year-old woman involved in a deadly hit and run is sentenced to up to 40 years behind bars.
On the 24th of August 2018, Rebecca Frick and her boyfriend were at a Shell gas station in Erie, Pennsylvania. They had a pit bull with them and had tied the dog to a pole outside the store. 38-year-old Michelle Muir took issue with how the dog was being handled, and a heated verbal argument broke out between the 2 women. The situation seemed to end. Muir and her boyfriend started walking away from the gas station, heading down East 6th Street toward Wallace Street, but Frick got into her car and followed them. When they reached the intersection of East 6th and Wallace, Frick drove her vehicle directly into Muir and the dog. Security footage from the area captured the entire incident. Frick sped away from the scene immediately after the impact. Muir was rushed to UPMC Hamot Hospital, but she died of blunt force trauma to her head. She was 38 years old. Frick was originally charged with first-degree murder, along with 8 additional charges. But in April 2019, she reached a plea agreement with Erie County prosecutors and pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, with the other charges dropped. On the 30th of May 2019, Judge John Trusilla sentenced Rebecca Frick to 16 to 40 years in prison. Grace Coleman.
Judge nearly brought to tears in an Orange County courtroom today. He listened as an orphan child described life.
On the evening of the 8th of December 2020, Henry Saldana Mejia and his wife Gabriela Andrade were driving through Newport Beach, California, with their 3 young daughters. The girls, ages 1, 4, and 5, were buckled into their car seats, dressed in their Christmas pajamas. The family was out looking at holiday lights. Henry had just finished his last shift at the nearby Pelican Hill Resort, where he worked in housekeeping, and they had stopped to pick up his final paycheck. At approximately 7:46 p.m., Grace Coleman ran a red light at the intersection of Newport Coast Drive and Pelican Hills Road. She was driving a Range Rover at 75 miles per hour. Her blood alcohol level was 0.22%, nearly 3 times the legal limit. She slammed into the family's Nissan Versa. Henry, 27, and Gabriela, 28, were both killed on impact. Their 3 daughters survived but were seriously injured. All 3 suffered broken legs. The 5-year-old also had 2 broken arms. They were left strapped in their car seats beside the bodies of their parents. Coleman fled the scene on foot. Earlier that evening, someone else had driven her home from a brewery, but she had gotten back behind the wheel anyway. She had also been arrested for DUI just 4 months earlier, in August 2020. In June 2022, Coleman pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, DUI causing bodily injury, and hit and run resulting in death, among other charges. On the 29th of July, 2022, she was sentenced to 21 years to life in prison.